be on my mind and in my thinking, on my lips and in my speaking, and in my heart and in my being. Amen. Please be seated. Well, yikes. This is one tough gospel to preach on. I have to say that I really struggled to get the meaning of this week's reading. I think this is one of the most difficult and challenging parables in all of the four Gospels. And I hope it's okay to share this with you, that sometimes for me and maybe for you too, what Jesus says just isn't easy to understand or interpret. That sometimes a gospel passage makes us scratch our head. What is Jesus talking about? What is Jesus talking about? He says one thing and he intertwines it with another, and he creates a tangle for us to unravel. And this gospel really is a tangle. I must say that I felt a great temptation to insert another gospel reading for today, preacher's choice, instead of following the lectionary. It would have been easier for sure. But the truth is that following Jesus and listening to what Jesus has to say and opening up Jesus' words aren't always easy. So maybe we can help each other figure this one out. So what's going on in today's reading? Well, here's the traditional take on this parable. There's a business manager for a rich man, a landowner, and it seems that the business manager engages in what we might call dubious or sketchy business practices that today would get a D or an F rating from the Better Business Bureau. So it seems this business manager is cheating or stealing, and perhaps he is cheating the tenant farmers by adding false charges to the bill, and perhaps he is stealing from the landowner by keeping a percentage of those overcharges for himself, in addition to the salary he makes as the business manager. But still he makes the landowner wealthy by these practices, and the landowner sees him as a good employee. But then something goes wrong. And maybe there's an economic downturn and the landowner's profits decrease. And maybe someone tells the landowner that, there's something weird going on with your business manager. And suddenly the landowner notices that he's losing money. Maybe because the tenant farmers can't pay the bill. They can't pay what they owe, especially when the business manager has padded their bills. So all of a sudden, this good business manager isn't so good anymore. The landowner fires the business manager and then asks for an accounting. And then we hear that the business manager gets scared about his own future, right? He has this layoff notice in hand, and he thinks to himself, I'm not in any sort of shape to do manual labor. He says, I'm too proud to beg. So he hatches this strategic job, the strategic plan, how not to get his job back, but to put him on the good side of the folks who owe money to the landowner. So he decides to pare down their bills. And in fact, I wonder if the business manager lacked business skills, because he seems to lack the knowledge of what the tenants owe him. And he has to ask them, how much do you owe? How much do you owe? Now, he's figured it out because he thinks, if I help the tenant farmers by reducing their debt, they'll help me if I lose my job by feeding me. My Italian relatives refer to this as one hand washing the other. So the business manager does just that. He decreases the amounts of the bills the tenant farmers owe, and the tenant farmers, who are now being perhaps honestly treated, can pay their bills and remain on the land. And the second outcome is that the landowner gets paid. His cash flow is restored. And the third outcome is that the business manager gets to keep his job. So now we've got that figured out. It's about treating people with honesty and engaging in good stewardship, and that's the message. Or is it? This parable is commonly known as the parable of the dishonest steward. And I think we all get that, but here is the part that really puzzles me, the part that makes me want to throw my hands up in the air and walk away. Because in this parable, the landowner never calls the business manager dishonest. He never says that. But on the other hand, he doesn't call him honest either. But Jesus calls him wise. He calls him wise. So what is the wisdom in this story? Because isn't it about dishonesty? Doesn't this guy belong in jail? But he's being called wise. So we are left to wonder, why is the dishonest manager called that? And then why is he commended? So let's rewind back a little bit. Is the business manager really dishonest? Theologian Richard Swanson says that there's a trouble in the translation of the word dishonest. He says that in Greek, the translation for the business manager, what the business manager is engaging in, is that he was slandered. He was slandered as being dishonest by a third party who tells the landowner that the business manager is doing something he shouldn't do. So then the story changes in the meaning because perhaps the business manager didn't do anything wrong at all. Maybe the business manager is innocent, but he's being fired on hearsay. We don't see any proof that the business manager is actually dishonest. So let me pose these what-ifs. What if the business manager is practicing compassion? He shows his compassion by not collecting debts from tenants when the crop yield is low. What if the business manager is practicing justice? What if he pares down the bills of the tenants so they won't be kicked off the land and lose their homes and livelihoods? What if the business manager is practicing equity by finding a way for the landowner and the tenants to receive their due in the fairest way possible? What if the business manager realizes that he can't serve the landowner and God, so he chooses to serve God by figuring out a way that all are served and all have what they need? So I will leave these questions for you to ponder for the coming week. But what more can we take from today's gospel? Well, I think there are a couple of things. First, in our own lives, we all struggle to make sense of economic realities. Whether we're poor or we're wealthy or we're somewhere in between. And then there is this struggle to make good use of our economic resources and given our values and being followers of Jesus. And then there is this whole question of wealth and equity and what we do with what we have and how much is enough and how much can we share and in what ways. So think about the business manager again. Is he wise? I think he is. He has a realization that life, in fact, his survival and the survival of the tenant farmers and the landowners are co-relational and they're interdependent. And when the poor, in this case the tenant farmers, suffer, then really in the scheme of the world, in Jesus' time and in our world, everyone suffers. So when one or some take more than they need, then another or many don't have what they need to sustain them. So back to today, think about what is happening on our planet, our earthly home. Overuse of resources, land, the need for convenience, we're all a part of that. But it may bring more to some, but great loss and suffering for many. And remember too that the sacred wealth of the forest and the air and the water and the planet and animals and human life is co-relational. It is interdependent. And God calls us to be in right relationship in how we define wealth and resources and how we share them and how we use them. Jesus says, love God and love each other. And maybe the business manager understood that we are all here to care for each other And there are many ways to make that happen. And I think indeed he was more wise than dishonest. So I'd like to ask you to do something this week. In the spirit of the gospel, find an invitation to see those around us as God's true gifts to us, that human wealth, honest wealth, and the true riches of life and community, where we all share and we all prosper. So yes, yikes, this is a tough gospel passage. And like this business manager, work through that tangle of what Christ calls us to journey into with him and through him. Amen.